Good morning. I think the very definition of the deep state is when the intelligence communities withhold information from Congress. Today there's a CIA briefing going on right now for which most rank and file senators and congressmen have been excluded. I think it's wrong for the CIA to have expressed a conclusion that the Crown Prince was involved with the killing of Khashoggi and then withhold that information. I know about the information of the CIA's conclusions only by reading it in the media. If I were in the briefing today, I would ask the CIA director several items. Was the Crown Prince's brother communicating with Khashoggi, telling him it was fine to go to the consulate in Istanbul? Were there text messages sent back from the killers to the Crown Prince's office? Was there phone conversation between the Crown Prince and the killers? Some are saying there is no smoking gun. Well, what's being reported is that there is a smoking gun. There's communication directly from the killers back to the Crown Prince's office. I think the time has come for the Senate to grab back foreign policy and say that, you know what, the president, no president, this president or the previous president, has the power to take our country to war with Saudi Arabia and Yemen without the permission of the Senate.
Senator, the state is involved, but isn't it the White House that's preventing the CIA director from briefing the full Senate?
The definition of the deep state is when intelligence communities have so much power that there's no oversight. I've been arguing for probably nearly a decade that with intelligence, it's only given to a few people within our system. That's more like an oligarchy. Only 8 people. Has nothing to do with Trump. Not everything's about Trump. There are 8 people in Congress who get briefings on intelligence. That is not democracy. That is not democratic representation, nor is it democratic oversight. I think the information needs to be shared widely with those who are elected. Why should someone elected in California get the information and someone in Kentucky not get the information? It doesn't make any sense.
What did leaders tell you as to the reason why you aren't getting briefing? The full Senate was briefed last week.
Well, no, I came to the full Senate briefing, but there was no briefing from the CIA. And what I'm concerned about are the public statements from members of the administration who say there's no direct evidence. Well, to me, it sounds fairly direct if there was communication going on between the killers in Istanbul and the Crown Prince's office in Saudi Arabia. Here's the thing the media has missed. Here's the question you need to ask Pompeo and Mattis. They keep saying there's no direct evidence. Ask them, do they disagree with the CIA's conclusions? You see, they're answering a question they want to answer. They're not answering the real question. If the CIA has looked at all of this information and says with a high degree of probability that we think the Crown Prince was involved, does Secretary Mattis and Secretary Pompeo disagree with the conclusions? That's not what they're saying.
Did you ask them that last week?
I can't go into anything I've asked them in a classified hearing, but I'm saying I would, if I were in the media, ask them, do you disagree with the conclusions? My guess is if they're honest, they'll tell you they don't disagree with the conclusions, that the constellation and compilation of all the facts are that yes, he was involved. But we're playing a game of words here. No direct evidence, no smoking gun. Well, I think that's, open to argument. I really think that if there's direct communication, the media has reported that the Crown Prince's brother directly communicated with Khashoggi, and then the media is also reporting that there's communications in Istanbul going to the Crown Prince's office at the time of the killing. I would want to know more about that to help me make a conclusion, but the definition of the deep state is rank and file people are excluded from oversight. I can have no oversight, and the deep state simply means that intelligence community has too much power that's independent of representative oversight. It has nothing to do with which president there is. I'd say the same whether it was a Democrat president or a Republican.
Senator, just to be clear, whatever the specific information here might be, that the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense can come and speak broadly about it. Sure, that's no problem, but to get into the specifics is a whole different scenario.
Right. I think there are reasons why you wouldn't want to get into the specifics of, who listens to who on the phone. The only reason I'm saying it is not because I heard it I haven't been in the intelligence briefing to hear that. I read it in the newspaper. Now you can argue why that shouldn't be presented because it reveals our abilities to eavesdrop. But I would say that now the information is out there, I think the conclusion shouldn't be classified. So for example, the newspaper has written that the CIA has concluded with high probability that the Crown Prince was involved. That doesn't sound to me like something classified. How you come about it, all the details, you can see how some of that has to be classified. But the conclusion, see, not only is it classified, it's being prevented, rank and file members are being prevented from even hearing it.
If I can follow up, how does not having that information make it harder to make policy decisions like the Yemen resolution that you guys are looking at now?
Right. Well, I think it's incredibly important that we discuss that the CIA has with high probability said a leader of a foreign country killed and dismembered a person in the consulate. I mean, people have said, oh, people kill people all the time. Tell me another time in which someone was killed and dismembered in a consulate where you're supposed to have this protection, this international protection. No, I think it's extraordinary what happened, but it's on the heels of bad behavior by Saudi Arabia. It's on the heels of an unjust war killing civilians in Yemen. It's on the heels of irrational behavior blockading Qatar. It's also on the heels of Saudi Arabia having nearly 1,000 people in prison who have had no trial, that have been in prison for over a year. Saudi Arabia has a young man by the name of Barik al-Nimr who was 17 when he was picked up at a rally. He is on death row and set to be executed and crucified. So there's a game being played. Oh, we're going to let women drive, but we're still going to execute and crucify people.
Senator, just to be clear, you asked to attend this briefing as a rebuff based on it?
I was not notified of the hearing. In fact, I just passed a senator or a Democrat senator on the way over here and asked him about it. He had not heard of it. So we're reading about this in the media. So I can't even ask to be included in it because I didn't know it was going to happen, except for reading about it in the media. That's not the way it should be. She should have come and testified before all senators. And if you have some senators that are more equal than others, that is not democratic representation. Every senator is equal and it should have equal access to the intelligence.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
What's the reaction to the verdict you just heard?
I have zero question in my mind that the Crown Prince, MBS, ordered the killing, monitored the killing, knew exactly what was happening, planned it in advance. If he was in front of a jury, he would be convicted in 30 minutes guilty. So the question is, what do we do about that? So far, it's unfortunate, but I think they feel like this is something that's coming past because the administration has not spoken to this in a way that it has spoken to it in a manner that really gives them immunity. And so what the message is to him and those around him is that you can go around killing journalists. Countries like the United States can know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you killed a journalist. And by the way, they've, as you know, renditioned other people and tortured other people that have been their dissidents. So the message we've sent to them is one that will cause him to continue on the path that he's on, and I'm sure other actors in the region will take note of that. So somehow or another, it's unfortunate, and again, I'm continuing to urge the administration to themselves speak to this in the appropriate manner.
What do you want them to do?
This has got to be strongly condemned by the administration, strongly condemned, and then there's got to be a price to pay for what has happened. I know that they have to have exactly the same intelligence that we have, and there's no way that anybody with a straight face could say there's any question about what has happened. So,
what are you
so it's always, as you know, far more difficult to do something legislatively. I would prefer that we speak to the killing of the journalist. There are others that would prefer to speak to the killing of the journalist and to Yemen. So when you start moving down that path on a bill that addresses the War Powers Act, which is in itself complicated, and some administrations would say it's even unconstitutional, obviously that makes it difficult. And so we've got a task in front of us. I would like to actually pass something that became law. Others would like just to send a message. So you take all of those together. It'd be much better if the Commander-in-Chief would stand up and say to the world, we don't condone the killing, the ordering and the killing and dismemberment of journalists. We don't condone that. And therefore, we're going to take these steps. That doesn't appear to happen. I hope it hasn't appeared to happen yet. I hope it happens in the next couple of days. If it doesn't, we've got to figure out a way to address it, and that makes it much more difficult.
Are you
find something
One of the country's economic interests more important than what you
Well, first of all,
the
the amount of equipment they're buying is not anywhere near the number that has been laid out. So the economic piece of this is, it's not even close to the numbers that have been laid out. Look, Saudi Arabia does what it does with oil and with Iran. They do what's in their best interest, okay? So, as you know, you saw recently where they're negotiating to curtail the amount of oil production because prices are where they are. So to think that they do what they're doing with oil or they do what they do with Iran because of us is a misnomer. It's in their own interest to do what they do in both cases.
Senator, are you planning to be willfully blind to, I'm sorry, you can't say with a straight face that this
you cannot
wasn't
say
done.
with a straight face.
So how do you square what Mike Pompeo said standing at these microphones last week, that there's no direct evidence of this, and how do you square the two briefings you got
Let me just
over the
put it
last
this
week?
way. If the Crown Prince went in front of a jury, he would be convicted in 30 minutes.
Of murder?
Yes.
Why isn't the Yemen resolution something that does have teeth? One of the right ways to try to punish Saudi Arabia.
Which one?
The Yemen resolution.
Well, the Yemen resolution gets into a war powers situation, and the administration can easily turn right back around and say we're not involved in hostilities. We're not refueling their equipment right now. That has stopped. So we're selling them bombs. We're selling them bombs, and the purpose in selling those bombs is to keep them from killing more innocent civilians because they're really poor at conducting military operations. They're very poor at conducting military operations. So anyway, I don't want to debate that with you right now. What I'll say is there's complications with that. And I'd like to figure out a way to have a consensus amendment. It may not be doable, but that's what we're working on. And we're working. And the reason it's difficult is there are some people that would like to speak only to the killing of the journalist. There are other people that want to speak to the Yemen issue at large. Trying to pool that together in a manner that unifies Congress is difficult. It would be really easy for the president to walk out into the press room today and just state that that MBS killed a journalist. We know he killed a journalist. We know he ordered it. We know we know that he monitored it. These are all people that are very close to him, and that is not acceptable per American standards. And going out, by the way, and getting other people in other countries and renditioning them back to the country and torturing them just because they happen to have a different point of view as to the regime is also inappropriate. So I think the message to them is, look, this is something that we can get away with. The greatest country on earth and its leader has said it's okay for us to get away with this. We're going to continue doing it.
Does it make you sad the president won't come out and say that today?
I don't want to use the word sad. I'm urging in a positive way that they take action themselves because it would be, I don't know, we'll see.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. It's a pleasure.
Always a team player, that trip.
Are you satisfied with the briefing today, Senator?
Yes, I was satisfied with the briefing. I'll simply say that I am now more convinced than I was before, and I was pretty convinced that, in fact, the United States must have a strong response to both the war in Yemen as well as the killing of a United States permanent resident and journalist in Jamal Khashoggi. And only a strong response by the United States will send a clear and unequivocal message that such actions are not acceptable in the world stage. And I think that's more important than ever. And I hope that Senator Graham and my legislation, which would create a real set of consequences, mandatory global Magnitsky, a series of sanctions beyond those that exist, would be a very strong answer to what has happened here. Thank you
So
very
you
much.
would, so you would support your legislation as an amendment? Thank you.
Is his preferred time not
No, he said he was satisfied.
So,
Step up just a little bit.
yeah.
How do you feel after the briefing today, sir?
I went into the briefing believing it was virtually impossible for an operation like this to be carried out without the Crown Prince's knowledge. I left the briefing with high confidence that my initial assessment of the situation is correct. I left the briefing being amazed by our CIA and intelligence community's capability and their analytical reasoning. The CIA, in my view, rose to the occasion in terms of informing the Congress about what happened on October the 2nd, what's happened since, and what happened before. So I am very satisfied with the briefing. There's a desire by the intelligence community to limit the number of people briefed. After that request was made, I understand now why they want to keep it more limited than before. So here's my takeaway, that Saudi Arabia is a strategic ally and the relationship is worth saving, but not at all cost. We'll do more damage to our standing in the world and our national security by ignoring MBS than dealing with him. MBS, the Crown Prince, is a wrecking ball. I think he's complicit in the murder of Mr. Khashoggi to the highest level possible. I think the behavior before the Khashoggi murder was beyond disturbing, and I cannot see him being a reliable partner to the United States. Saudi Arabia and MBS are two different entities. If the Saudi government is going to be in the hands of this man for a long time to come, I find it very difficult to be able to do business because I think he's crazy. I think he is dangerous, and he has put the relationship at risk. No one has fought for this relationship harder than myself and Senator McCain. Senator McCain and I went on the floor stopping lawsuits against the kingdom for complicity in 9/11 because we did not believe the royal family was involved in the planning and execution of the 9/11 attacks. If John McCain were alive, I believe he would be standing with me today, leading the charge to come down like a ton of bricks on the Crown Prince for what he's done to the relationship, the way he's destabilized the region. So what will I do? I will try to work my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to send a statement before the end of this Congress that in fact the Crown Prince was complicit in the murder of Mr. Khashoggi, that during his tenure as Crown Prince he's put the region in chaos and has undercut the relationship, and I cannot support arms sales to Saudi Arabia as long as he's going to be in charge of this country. The war in Yemen has gotten out of control. The brutality of this murder is beyond my sharing it with you. It was one of the most brutal acts one could imagine, and it says a lot about him as a person, and everybody is watching us. There are people who are raising their voice in dissent throughout the region and the world. They look to America for a helping hand. There are other people in the region who will see this as a green light if we look the other way. We have relationships with many countries throughout the world. If they believe the relationship is more important than our values, then they're going to get the wrong message and the world becomes a more dangerous place.
So what legislation are you
Did you hear the audio in there? Did you hear the audio of the murder in there?
What legislation are you
Secretary Pompeo stood where you're standing right now last week and said he had seen no direct evidence of the prince's involvement.
I think Secretary Pompeo and Mattis are following the lead of the president. There's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw. You have to be willfully blind not to come to the conclusion that this was orchestrated and organized by people under the command of MBS, and that he was intricately involved in the demise of Mr. Khashoggi. Open source reports show that he had been focusing on Mr. Khashoggi for a very long time. It is zero chance, zero, that this happened in such an organized fashion without the Crown Prince, as do Pompeo and Mattis. I have great respect for them. I would imagine if they were Democratic, in a Democratic administration, I would be all over them for being in the pocket of Saudi Arabia, but since I have such respect for them, I'm going to assume that they're being good soldiers, and when they look at the analysis, they're being technical in their statement, but they're not giving the assessment that I think the Senate will have. I would really question somebody's judgment if they couldn't figure this out. It is there to be figured out. Please let me finish. And I think the reason they don't draw the conclusion that he's complicit is because the administration doesn't want to go down that road, not because there's not evidence to suggest he's complicit.
Are you said you've been working on a statement over the next between now?
So I'm
and
going to do two things.
Anything
I'm going to do
more
two
teeth
things.
than that?
Yes, I'm going to try to get a sense of the Senate resolution where we all vote and designate MBS as one of the people responsible for the death of Mr. Khashoggi, that he was complicit in the murder, that I not only have high confidence, overwhelming belief that that's the case. Then what do you do about it? I want to make sure that Saudi Arabia is put on notice, that business as usual has come to an end for me. I will not look at the kingdom the same way that I used to look at it. I will not support arms sales until all responsible for the death of Mr. Khashoggi have been brought to justice. I will and I will no longer support the war in Yemen as constructed.
So you're still pushing the Menendez bill,
does that mean you will
Yeah, we're working on it.
for the Sanders resolution?
No, I think that's the wrong approach. What I want to do is make a statement about the complicity of the Crown Prince that I think is supported overwhelmingly by the evidence. Then I want sanctions imposed, global Magnitsky Act sanctions against those responsible, and I want to put the world on notice that if you align yourself with the United States, you try to integrate your economy with ours, you try to do joint military operations, there's a certain expectation you have to meet. And one of those expectations is that you will not be involved in extrajudicial killing of a journalist in the most brutal fashion. And if we don't send that message, we're really making the world a more dangerous place.
President Trump's response.
Chairman Corker, could you come to the mic for a second? Senator Corker.
Where is Corker? Oh, here he is, right here.